Okay, the purpose of this video is to show you some of the basics of animation in Blender, and to that end I'm going to use my tank model that I've set up. So this is the tank model we set up before, and it's actually made of three objects: the body of the tank, the turret, and the cannon. And the cannon is a child of the turret, so that if I rotate the turret around, say, the z-axis, then the gun turns as well. And the turret is a child of the body, so if I move the body by grabbing it and moving it around, then the turret and the cannon follow along because of the child-parent relationships that have been set up here. To create an animation, we have to be aware that this area down here is the timeline view. You can see that if you look in the menu, the little clock means timeline. And over here on the properties panel, I've switched to the little camera icon, which are the render settings. So, normally when we render out a single image, when we press F12, we're actually activating that button there for render, which brings up our render. The resolution of that render is 1920 by 1080, but it only renders out at 50%, so it's actually half of that. So whatever 1920 divided by 2 and 1080 divided by 2 is the actual size of this image that we get whenever we either click render or press F12. If you want to go back to 3D view from here and escape isn't working, you can always close down the render result by clicking that X button, or over here switch back to 3D view. So there's a couple of ways of getting out of that once you're there. The button next to render says animation, and if I was to click that right now, it would render out 250 frames of animation, but it wouldn't do it the way we want it to, probably because we don't know what we're doing yet. And in fact, there is really no animation at the moment. If I press play down here, then it plays through all the frames. This green line moving is showing us that it's showing us different frames, but because we haven't moved the tank or moved anything else in the scene, it doesn't look like anything's happening, and you can see it starts back at 0 again once it gets up to 250. So there are 250 frames here, and we're playing through them and nothing is happening. So there's no point in me clicking animation, because all I'm going to be doing is creating a whole bunch of frames of this image, and there's no point in doing that. So what I really want to do is go back to the beginning and somehow include some changes to the tank so that we actually see something animate. Another thing that's important to know before we go in here is that, with our start frame is 1, our end frame is 250. It says that over here. You can also see that in the timeline highlight here. It goes all the way from 0 to 250. And it's got a frame rate of 24 FPS, or frames per second. So after 24 frames, if I click here in frame 24, and you could be more precise by using this gadget down here. So that's frame 24, I know because it says so. And on frame 24, a second will have passed. So that's 1 second. So then if there are 250 frames at 24 frames per second, then let's calculate that. There's 240 frames divided by 24 per second, gives you 10 seconds of 10 seconds of video at the default. Now you can change the size of this. You can click in any one of these and click E, and that ends it there, you see. So you can click anywhere and click E, and of course you can adjust it by this number down here, or you can go up here to end frame and just type whichever one you want to end on. Let's set it back to 240, the default. I'm now on frame 229 of 240 frames. This video will render out at 24 frames per second. I'm going to go back to the beginning again. So before we start to make changes to the tank's position and things and try and record that in our set of frames here, you really have to decide what it is you're going to try and achieve. So I'm just going to show you, if I grab the tank and limit it to the y-axis, I guess I'm going to start it off frame, off camera, and I'm going to have it come in, stop, and then I'm going to get the turret to rotate around the z-axis and point towards me, and then I might even get the cannon to point up towards the camera, because at the moment it's pointing off camera, so I'll maybe get that to rotate up towards me as well. So those are the things I want to achieve. I'm just going to do Control Z to get back to where I was. So the first thing I want to do at frame 0 then is record the tank being off camera. So I'm going to grab the tank again on the y-axis and take it all the way off camera. But now I need to tell the tank to remember that. And the way that I get it to remember is by doing a thing called inserting a keyframe. By inserting a keyframe, I get the tank to remember its current location. And you've got to do that on frame 0, otherwise it won't know where to start the animation. So I'm going to make sure the mouse is in the 3D view and press I for insert keyframe. And there's a whole bunch of options here. You can see the one that you'll use the most is called lock rot scale, because that inserts a keyframe for the location, the rotation, and the scaling of the tank. So it remembers, you know, everything about it at that point in time. So I'm going to click that lock rot scale, and now the tank knows that on frame 0 it's there. If I move the timeline on, you can see that a little yellow line has appeared in the animation. What's that called? The timeline, in the timeline, for frame 0. So that means it knows where it is at the beginning of the animation, and that's useful. If I grab the tank now and put it down there somewhere, doesn't really matter where, and then go back to frame 0, it remembers it's there, and because I didn't tell it to remember that I'd put it down there, it's forgotten that information now, and so it just stays there the whole time. So I will want to move it. I'll want to move it by grabbing it in the Y and moving it so it comes on camera like that and then stops. Now, how many seconds I want that to happen over is a good question. Let's say it should take 3 seconds. So again, going back to our calculator, 3 times 24 would be 72. So on frame 72 it should be at the center point. So I'm going to move to frame 72 manually to get it precise, and then you see it's grabbed the tank now and moved it back there because it's remembering where it was. So I'm going to put it where I want on frame 72. Then I have to insert a new keyframe. So insert lock rot scale. And now if I move off to another frame, you can see on frame 0 it knows it's back there. On frame, if I can find it, 72, it knows it's supposed to be there. And then it does a clever thing called interpolation. And I can drag my mouse along the timeline here, and you can see that it knows now where it should be between the start and the end point. It knows that it should travel between those 2 points. And that's the basics of animation, really. If I go back to the beginning and press play, the tank hoves into view, and by frame 72 it's in position. It doesn't do anything else because I haven't told it to do anything else. There it goes again, and boom, it's in position. So I'm going to rewind to frame 0. Okay, the next thing I want to do is to rotate the turret to get the cannon to face in a different direction. Let's say I want to do another 3 seconds, so on second number 6 I'll just double that then. So on frame 144 I'm going to grab the turret and rotate it on the z-axis only round to, oh, it's very fiddly, round to there. And I'm going to insert a keyframe and lock rot scale again, and then let's go back to the beginning, and we see a problem. If I play it now, it thinks it's there the whole time, and the problem is that I inserted 2 keyframes for the tank body way at the beginning, but I didn't insert any keyframes for the turret. So the turret only has this 1 yellow keyframe. Look, let's switch between them again. There's the tank body, there's the turret. The tank body has 2 yellow keyframes, and the tank turret only has 1. And because it's only got 1, it's only in 1 position ever. So I'm going to need to get rid of this keyframe and redo what I was doing. So to get rid of a keyframe, you can click on it and you do Alt-I to get rid of it. Alt-I. Oops, my mouse needs to be up in the 3D view. It says, do you want to delete the keyframe? I say yes. And I'm also going to want to set its rotation back to nothing. I'd maybe have been quicker doing a control undo, but I can just come here and adjust the Z rotation to 0. Pressed N to get the properties panel to pop up for the turret. So now the turret has no keyframes. I'm going to go back to the body, back to frame 0. Actually, let's go all the way to frame 72, and I'll just insert a keyframe for the turret there. There's no need to insert it on frame 0 because it's only at this point that I actually want it to turn. So I'll insert lock-rot scale there, go back to 144, and rotate the turret on the Z again. There we go, and insert a new keyframe. So now we've got two sets of yellow keyframes, one for the turret, one for the tank body. And if I drag the cursor along here, there along the timeline, you see that it turns and then, sorry, it moves the tank first facing forward, and then at that point it starts to turn the cannon, and then by the time we get past frame 144, nothing else happens. Okay, to finish off my animation, I'm going to go back to the turret, back to frame 144, and I'm going to tell the cannon to remember where it is on that frame, because I'm about to try and rotate the cannon up towards the camera. So I'm going to insert a keyframe here for the cannon so that it remembers where it should be at the beginning. And then actually I want to rotate it so that it points up the way, but at the moment that's not going to work so well for me because the rotation point is in the center of it. So I want to move that rotation point to way back here where it connects with the cylinder. I'm going to jump into wireframe mode, and I'm going to move the 3D cursor to there. Let's see, we'll do top down. I want it to be right there. And from front perspective, oops, down a little bit. And then from, actually let's change into ortho. That makes a difference. That's what ortho is for. Doing things precisely. Okay. And then there, let's check top, front. Right, that looks pretty good. Oh, doesn't look good from the top anymore. It seems to move every time I do that. Okay, I was having so much trouble positioning the 3D cursor there that I ended up bringing up the properties panel and adjusting it using the values here, because it didn't seem to want to do what I wanted it to do. So I positioned it using these values, and now it's in a happy location from the front, the top, and the right as well. Okay, so the reason I'm doing all that is because I want to set the origin of the cannon to be back at that point there. So I'm going to set the origin to 3D cursor, and then I'm going to come back into perspective mode and come out of wireframe mode, and then look back through the camera, and I'm going to rotate. Oh, yeah, actually I want to switch to object, to local coordinates on that object. And then I want to rotate it around its own x-axis, so it moves up, 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 like that. And then I think that might be good. And I want that to be in position on, well, let's see in another 3 seconds. So if that was 3 seconds, then if I multiply it by 3, I'll be on frame 216. So, ow. Well, that hasn't worked because it's remembered. Okay, so I'm learning as I go here. The reason it's popped forward like that is because it remembered its location because I set the keyframe, and because I changed the center point, it then shunted the whole cannon forward. So that's okay. I'm going to drag it back to there, and then I think that should be okay. If I go back to the beginning of the video, we should see it now. Come into view. Oh no, that's wrong. Okay, I think I'm going to have to delete the keyframe on the cannon. So let's see. Alt I with the mouse in there, get rid of that keyframe, and then I'm going to move it back there, and then take it back to the beginning. Look through the camera, press play. There we go. That's it now. Okay, with the keyframe out of the way. Okay, so that's that fixed. So it looks like that's a good learning experience. It looks like we really want to set the centering positions before we set any keyframes on an object. So you live and learn. Okay, so let's divide that by 3 again, and then multiply by 2. So on frame 144, we want to go back and set the reminder that should be in that position. So I'm going to insert the Lockrot scale again, just double check to make sure that is working okay up until that point. That's fine. And then on frame 216, I'm going to do the rotation again. So rotate around its X. Oh, that's not going very well. There we go. That's good. And insert a keyframe for that. There we go. By hook or by crook, I think I've done it. So we go back to the start, press play. Here comes the tank. The turret turns around. At the point that it reaches that point, it starts to raise its cannon towards me. And it's a bit of a magic cannon. It seems to be rotating a little bit to the right as it goes up, so that's a little bit unusual, but I'll live with it for now. Okay, so that's our animation all set up with keyframes. The other thing that we can do here is that we can change the properties of things and also get the computer to remember things like that. So I suppose a pretty strange example would be changing the material color on the tank. So well, let's do that just for fun. So in the material section, the tank is white, but by the time it gets into that first frame on frame 72, I'm going to get it to change color. So what I'll do is, well, first of all, back on frame 0. Oops. Back on frame 0, I should tell it to remember, or frame 1 rather, I'll tell it to remember that it's white. So you can hover your mouse over the color of the diffuse material here and just press I, and you see how it's put a border on that. So that's inserted a keyframe for the color. So if I then come forward to frame 72, and I'm going to select, let's see, I'll make it red. So no green, no blue, and then I'll insert a keyframe there. So now the tank is red, and then on frame 144 I'll change it to green. And I'll insert a keyframe there, and then on frame, was it 216? Oh, I have trouble finding that one. There we go. On frame 216, I'll set it to blue, so it'll be the amazing changing color tank. And I need to remember to press I for that as well. So hopefully this will work. Let's see. There we go. We see how it's changing color as it goes through the animations. green, and then it starts to turn into blue, and then by the time it's finished it's blue. Hooray! So that's kind of strange. I wonder why the cannon isn't changing color as well. One assumes it doesn't have a material on it. Oh, yeah, look at that. So it's using material 0.1. I'll just switch that for the material that everybody's using, and then everything should be affected now by this ridiculous material changing. Now you can do that with just about any setting that you can find over here. All you have to do is change the setting and then press I at a particular frame, and it will remember what you changed the setting to at that point. So it's another good one to look out for. If you see one of these borders around something and you didn't set it, that means you probably pressed I by accident at some point and set up a keyframe. So we have our animation. Just as normal, you know, you can render any particular frame of this. So if you wanted to render this frame out, you can just go to that frame and press F12. If you preferred this frame over here, you can go there and press F12. Absolutely no problem. I quickly went and added my lighting rig in from another project so that this would look a little bit nicer when I render it than it was before. Now, the other thing to worry about now that we've made our animation is how do we... Oops. Trying to get... Oh, there we go. I'm trying... how are we going to render it? With the default options, if I click animation now, it's actually not going to do what you might imagine. It's not going to make a video for me because down here I've told it to output PNGs. Now there might be a reason, and there is a good reason, which we'll talk about later, as to why you might want to save a video out as a collection of single images. Basically it's good for video editing, but we'll come back to that later. For the purposes of what we're doing right now, we probably want to change that so that instead of outputting as a PNG, it outputs as a movie file of some kind. And I'm going to choose the output format MPEG because it's a good compression format. If you chose AVI RAW, for example, it would be the video would be massive, so you don't want to do that. So you want to choose something like MPEG. The other thing is, where do you put the output? Now, if you choose a network drive like your H drive or the Dropbox, for example, then this is going to take a long time because it takes longer to render things out to a network drive because it has to go over the network. So what you want to do is make sure that the output, probably best not to set it to temp either. So you want to change this output location to somewhere on the computer that you're using right now. And the best place probably is just the desktop. So you can just fire it onto the desktop. And I'm going to accept that as a location. So if I were to press render right now, it would render it out. If I was to press animation rather, it would render it out to the desktop as an MPEG. Some things to bear in mind here are how long this is going to take to render. You know, it's got to do 250 frames, 240 frames. So whatever you're doing, it's going to take 200, you know, if you render out a single image and it takes a minute, then it's probably going to take 240 minutes to render out the whole animation. So you should bear this kind of thing in mind. You can speed up your rendering by not rendering so many frames. That's thing number one. You can reduce the size of the output by adjusting this 50% to something smaller. This is especially good if you're trying to figure out whether or not your animation is any good before you render out a full resolution one. Let's see, what else can we change? Anti-aliasing is a good idea. Anti-aliasing basically makes your sort of jagged lines like that one on the bottom of the tank there, makes jagged lines look smooth, but you can either switch that off if you're in a hurry or turn it down. The other thing that's good for the end result is shading, but again you can switch a bunch of these shading options off if you're in a hurry. So if you want something to render quickly, switch shading off, switch anti-aliasing off, reduce the size of the thing that you're rendering, make sure you're not rendering out too many frames. As it is, because this is such a simple animation, it probably won't take that long to render out. Let's have a go and see what happens if I click animation now. Well, now we can see that it's rendering the first few frames for me. Of course, in the first few frames there's no tank there, so we have to just wait a while for the tank to show up. Here it comes. We're on frame 20 now. You can see it tells you about your progress here, and it tells you how long the last frame took to render, how long this frame is taking. You can see the green thing moving along here, and you can see the tank hovering into view. These little orange boxes are basically what the computer is working on at that particular moment in time. The more complicated you make a scene, the longer each frame is going to take to render. We've got 3 sun lamps reflecting off 3 objects, or however many surfaces are here, and that's, you know, taking a little amount of time. I'm just going to pause this and skip to when it's finished. Okay, we can see it coming into the home stretch here. It's on frame 234, so it's nearly there. And there we go, it's finished. Okay, so with that finished, what we're left with, hang on a second, let me minimize that and bring this in. What we're left with this file here, it's got a rubbish name. It says 0001 to 0240.dvd, and the other thing that's happened, if I go back and look at my settings, I told it to output as an MPEG, and let's go back and look at that file there. That says .dvd on it. Well, to get Windows to play nice with that, I don't usually do this, but in this case it works. If you just take DVD off the end and type MPG and hit enter, it says, are you sure this might become unusable? And in some cases that would become unusable, but in this case it works. So that's changed it to an MPEG, which Windows recognizes. If you don't have file extensions on your files, you should switch them on, so you can open up any folder. Hang on, let me just get an open folder here for you. So you can open up any folder and go to organize and folder and search options and view, and uncheck this box, hide extensions for known file types. Uncheck that box. I've already got it unchecked because I like to see my file extensions on things so I know what they are. So having done that, I've got myself a little video. And if I double click that, it should open up in, well, I've got this VLC media player thing. You can see the tank come around, turns the turret. Something a bit wonky happens when I do the turret rotation. That's something I'll have to work on another time. So there you've got the tank hovering into view, the color's changing because I told them to, the turret turns around, and the cannon rises up a bit wonkily to stare me in the face. And there, I've made a video.